The wind howled like a wounded beast, slamming against the walls of my cabin. Snow whirled in the air, thick as smoke, making it nearly impossible to see beyond the front porch. It was one of those nights when even the bravest of men would think twice before stepping outside. And then, through the storm, came a sound that made my blood run cold. A cry. Not just any cry. A desperate, heart-wrenching wail. Something between a howl and a sob. It cut through the wind, rising and falling in agonized bursts. I froze, my hand gripping the doorknob, breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I knew that sound. I'd heard wolves cry out before, but this was different. For a few seconds, I hesitated. Going outside in this blizzard was suicide. But the sound came again, closer this time, and something inside me snapped. I grabbed my coat, yanked the door open, and stepped into the freezing night. The wind was a knife against my skin, slicing through the thick fabric of my coat like it was nothing. Snow stung my face, forcing me to squint as I moved forward, following the sound. My boots crunched over fresh snow, the noise swallowed instantly by the howling wind. Then I saw it. A dark shape just beyond the reach of my porch light, crouched low in the snow. My heart slammed against my ribs. It was a wolf, no, a she-wolf. Her fur was a mix of gray and black, her body thin, her ribs faintly visible beneath the thick winter coat. Her eyes, wild, terrified, locked onto mine, and in her front paws, nestled against her chest, was a tiny bundle. A wolf pup. It wasn't moving. I took a step closer, half expecting the she-wolf to snarl, to bare her teeth and lunge at me. Instead, she let out a whimper, soft, pleading, her ears flattened against her skull, her body trembling, though not from the cold. She was afraid. I swallowed hard. A wild animal, coming to me for help? This wasn't right. This wasn't normal. I knew better than to get involved. This was nature's way, survival of the fittest. The pup was probably too weak to live, and the mother, desperate as she was, could do nothing but watch it die. That was the harsh reality of the wild. But then I looked closer. The pup's tiny chest barely moved, its fur caked with ice. It wasn't dead. Not yet. But it was close. And the mother, she wasn't running. She wasn't attacking. She was begging. I exhaled sharply, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Damn it! Slowly, carefully, I crouched down, extending a gloved hand. The she-wolf flinched but didn't move. I reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the pup. It was ice cold. This thing wouldn't last another hour out here. I couldn't explain why I did it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the she-wolf looked at me, her eyes filled with something too human to ignore. I scooped the tiny creature into my arms, pulling it close to my chest. The she-wolf let out a low whine, shifting forward as if torn between fight and flight. I held my breath, half expecting her to snap at me, but she didn't. Instead, she did something I never expected. She stepped back. The storm howled around us, the snow thickening, swirling in chaotic gusts. I turned, clutching the pup tightly, and made my way back toward the cabin. I half expected the she-wolf to follow, to attack, to snatch her pup from my arms. She didn't. She just stood there, watching, as I disappeared into the warmth of my home. The door slammed shut behind me, cutting off the roar of the storm. My breath came out in sharp, uneven bursts as I pressed my back against the wood, still clutching the pup against my chest. It wasn't moving. Its tiny body felt like a frozen rag, limp and lifeless. "Come on, don't do this," I muttered under my breath, kicking the snow off my boots as I rushed toward the fireplace. The fire had burned low, glowing embers barely giving off heat. I shoved the iron poker into the coals, stirring them up, then threw in a couple of logs. The flames hesitated, then flared to life, crackling as they consumed the dry wood. I dropped to my knees, unzipping my coat, and pulled the pup closer. His fur was wet and stiff with ice. I peeled off my gloves, rubbing its tiny body between my hands, trying to coax some warmth back into it. "Breathe," I whispered. Damn it, breathe. A weak twitch. Barely there, but enough. I pressed my fingers against its ribs, feeling the shallow rise and fall of its chest. It was still alive, but just barely. I reached for a dry towel near the hearth, wrapping it carefully, pressing it close to my own body heat. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window panes. I glanced toward the door. She was still out there. I stood up, moving to the window, brushing aside the frost-covered glass. The storm made it difficult to see, but there, just beyond the porch light's reach, was the she-wolf. She hadn't left. She sat in the snow, her ears pinned back, her eyes locked onto mine. She didn't move, didn't pace or growl, just watched. The logical part of my brain screamed at me to let nature take its course. This was a wild animal. I had no business interfering. But the logical part had lost the moment I stepped outside. I turned back to the pup, rubbing its tiny paws, feeling the ice melt between my fingers. It let out the faintest whimper, barely more than a breath, but it was enough to send a wave of relief crashing over me. Good, I murmured. You're still fighting. I sat back against the couch, still holding the small bundle against me, exhaustion creeping in. My mind spun with questions I couldn't answer. What the hell had just happened out there? Why had she come to me? And more importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do now? The pup stirred, another weak sound escaping its throat. I reached for an old blanket, wrapping it snugly, then leaned my head back against the cushions. The warmth of the fire was finally sinking into my bones, but sleep felt impossible. I didn't dare close my eyes, not while she was still out there, not while I had something she wasn't ready to walk away from. The night stretched long, an endless cycle of checking, waiting, and listening. Sleep was out of the question. I sat in the dim glow of the fire, staring at the tiny creature in my lap. Its breathing was shallow, each exhale barely more than a whisper against the blanket. I didn't know what else to do. Outside, the storm had lost some of its fury, but the wind still moaned through the cracks in the cabin walls. I turned my gaze toward the door. She was still there. I couldn't see her clearly, but every now and then, a gust of wind would shift just enough for the porch light to catch the glint of her eyes. She wasn't moving, just lying there, curled up against the threshold like some half-frozen sentinel. She was waiting, and for the first time I saw it, fear. Not the kind of fear I was used to seeing in wild animals. Not the flight-or-fight instinct that came with survival. This was something else. This was the kind of fear you saw in someone who had something to lose. I tightened my grip on the pup, feeling its tiny heartbeat against my palm. "Come on, little one," I murmured. "You've got someone out there who needs you to fight." The fire crackled, sending flickers of orange light dancing across the walls. The minutes bled into hours. I forced myself to stay awake, listening to the faint sounds of breath, feeling the slow rise and fall of the small body in my hands. Sometime before dawn, the pup twitched. It wasn't much, just a faint, involuntary movement, but it sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I held my breath, waiting. A few seconds later, it happened again. A little stronger this time. Then a sound. Weak, barely there, but real. Tiny whimper. I let out a slow, shaky exhale, relief washing over me in waves. "You're still in this," I whispered. I glanced toward the door. She was standing now, not pacing, not growling, just watching. I hesitated, then slowly rose from the couch, still cradling the pup. Moving carefully, I approached the door. Through the frost-covered glass, her silhouette was barely visible, but those eyes, they were locked onto me, burning with something raw and desperate. For a split second, I thought about opening the door. Just a crack, just enough to show her that her pup was still breathing. But something held me back. Instinct, maybe, or the simple fact that no matter how much trust she had shown me, she was still a wild animal. Instead, I crouched down near the door and whispered, "He's alive." I wasn't sure why I said it. She couldn't understand me. But as soon as the words left my lips, she let out the softest, most heartbreaking sound I had ever heard. Quiet whine. I pressed my forehead against the wood, exhaling. The storm outside had begun to die, but inside, a different kind of storm was just beginning. The first hint of dawn bled through the frost-covered windows, casting a dull gray light across the room. I hadn't slept. I barely moved from the couch, afraid that if I let go of the tiny creature in my arms, it would slip away for good. But something had changed. The pup stirred. A slow, weak movement, its tiny paws shifting under the blanket. I held my breath, waiting. Then, a twitch of its nose, a soft, barely audible whimper. "You're still here," I murmured, relief surging through me. I carefully unwrapped the blanket.
If you love stories about wildlife rescue, click the subscribe button below. Here's how the button looks on different devices. Every subscription helps spread these stories and raise awareness. The more people know, the more animals get the help they need. And remember, subscribing is completely free. Click subscribe now and join us in protecting wildlife.
But its breathing was stronger, more steady. Its fur, once stiff with ice, was now soft and dry against my fingers. It was alive, and it was fighting. I exhaled shakily, my chest tightening with something I couldn't quite name. I glanced toward the door. She was still there. The she-wolf had not left. She hadn't moved from her spot near the porch. Even now, as the first light of morning touched the snow, she sat there watching. It wasn't just desperation in her eyes anymore. It was trust. Slowly, I stood up, cradling the pup against my chest. My legs were stiff, my body aching from hours of tension. I crossed the room, stopping just short of the door. My breath fogged up the glass as I peered outside. Her ears twitched, her head tilted slightly, her gaze flickering between me and the small bundle in my arms. I hesitated. Then, with careful movements, I unlatched the door and pushed it open just a fraction. The cold rushed in instantly, biting at my skin, but I didn't care. She didn't move. I crouched down in the doorway, still holding the pup close. "He's alive," I said quietly, knowing full well she couldn't understand me. But maybe, just maybe, she didn't need to. Something flickered in her eyes. A spark of something ancient, something that stretched beyond instinct and survival. I extended my free hand, palm up. For a long moment, she didn't react. Then, slowly, cautiously, she stepped forward. The space between us shrank, each step hesitant but sure. Her breath was visible in the freezing air, wisps of warmth curling upward. Then, she did something I never expected. She lowered her head and pressed her nose against my hand. Not snapping, not recoiling, just touching. It lasted only a second, but it felt like something huge. A bridge between two worlds. A silent agreement. I let out a slow breath, steadying myself. "I don't know what happens next," I admitted, "but we'll figure it out." The she-wolf blinked, then stepped back. She wasn't leaving. Not yet. But something had shifted. She trusted me, and now that meant everything. The pup needed food. That much was obvious. But what the hell did you feed a wolf? I rummaged through the kitchen, pulling out anything that might work. Milk? No. Meat? Maybe. I had some leftover venison from the last hunt, frozen solid in the icebox. I cut off a small chunk, warmed it near the fire, and then hesitated. The pup was still weak, barely able to lift its head. There was no way it could chew. Sighing, I mashed the meat into smaller pieces, mixed it with warm water, and carefully brought a spoonful to its tiny mouth. "Come on, little one. You have to try." First, nothing. Then, the smallest flick of a tongue. A taste. A swallow. My chest tightened. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Outside, the she-wolf waited. She never came closer than the porch, never tried to barge in. But every night, as the wind howled and the trees groaned under the weight of ice, she returned. Watching, waiting, and every morning she was gone. I knew what she was doing. She was making sure I didn't fail, that I kept my end of whatever silent agreement we had. But there was a problem. If the pup survived, if it grew strong, what then? Would it stay here? Would it leave? And what about her? Would she take it back when the time came? Or had I already broken something between them by interfering? I hated not knowing the answers. Days passed. The pup grew stronger little by little. It wobbled when it tried to stand, its legs too weak to hold its weight, but it was trying. The fight in its tiny body was undeniable. And every night, I sat by the fire, glancing toward the door, knowing she was just beyond it, waiting in the dark. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped onto the porch, my boots crunching over the ice. The cold bit through my coat, but I barely felt it. She was there, as always, a dark shape against the snow. Her ears perked up when I approached, her body tense but not afraid. "I don't know what you expect me to do," I admitted. "I don't know how this ends." She didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small piece of meat, tossing it toward her. It landed in the snow between us. For a long moment, she didn't react. Then, slowly, she lowered her head, sniffed it, and finally ate. It was the first time she had accepted anything from me. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't just responsible for the pup anymore. I was responsible for them both. The time had come. The pup was stronger now. It no longer trembled when it moved. Its legs, once weak and fragile, now held its weight as it clumsily padded around the cabin. It was still small, still unsure of the world, but it was alive. And that meant a choice had to be made. I couldn't keep it here forever. The she-wolf was still waiting. Every night, every morning, always watching. She had trusted me to save her pup, and I had. But now, it was time to see if they still belonged to each other. The pup let out a small yawn, stretching in the warmth of the fire. I exhaled, then moved toward the door. "Come on," I said softly, lifting it carefully. "Let's see if she's ready." Stepping outside, the cold hit like a wall. The snow had settled thick over the ground, but the sky was clear now, the storm long gone. The air was crisp, sharp in my lungs. The pup squirmed in my arms, sensing something new. She was there. The she-wolf stood at the edge of the trees, her body tense. The moment she saw the pup, she stiffened, ears twitching, tail flicking behind her. I could see it in her eyes, the hesitation, the fear, the hope. I crouched down, slowly setting the pup into the snow. It blinked, sniffing at the cold ground, then hesitantly took a step forward. Then another, toward her. She let out a low whine, shifting on her paws. But she didn't move. Something was wrong. I could feel it before I saw it. A tension in the air, a stillness that didn't belong. Then I noticed the tracks. They weren't mine, and they weren't hers. Bigger, deeper, leading from the treeline but not stopping. Something had been here, watching, waiting. The she-wolf's ears flattened. She wasn't looking at her pup anymore. She was looking past it, past me, into the trees. A growl rumbled deep in her throat. I turned slowly, every muscle in my body tightening. Something else was out there. The she-wolf's growl deepened, her fur bristling along her spine. The pup, sensing the tension, froze in place, its small body shivering. Not from the cold, but from something else. Instinct. Fear. I tightened my grip on the axe handle strapped to my belt, my heart hammering. The tracks in the snow weren't hers. They weren't mine, and they weren't old. Something was out there, something close. The forest stood silent, too silent. The usual sounds of the wild, cracking branches, distant rustling, were absent. It was the kind of quiet that settled before something bad happened. I scanned the treeline, every muscle in my body tensed. Then movement. A shadow slipped between the trees, just on the edge of my vision. Then another, eyes low to the ground, watching. Wolves, but not hers. I didn't need to be an expert to know what this was. These weren't part of her pack. These were scavengers, loners, or worse, rivals, and they had been watching us for a while. The she-wolf let out a sharp bark, her body lowering into a defensive stance. The pup whimpered, stepping back, but she nudged it forward, away from the trees, toward me. Not toward safety, toward a choice. She wasn't taking it back to her den. She was hiding it. I clenched my jaw, realization settling in like a stone in my gut. She wasn't just nervous. She was desperate. The rival wolves weren't here for her. They were here for the pup. A low snarl echoed from the trees, closer this time. The wolves weren't waiting anymore. Neither could we. The first wolf broke from the trees. A massive, battle-scarred brute with dark fur and hungry eyes. Another followed, then a third. Their bodies were low to the ground, moving in a slow, deliberate advance. The she-wolf let out a deep, guttural snarl, stepping protectively in front of her pup. She was ready to fight, ready to die if she had to, and so was I. I tightened my grip on the axe, my breath forming clouds in the freezing air. My heart pounded, but I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about the pup, barely strong enough to stand. Thinking about the mother who had done the impossible, trusted a human. The lead wolf took another step forward, teeth bared. Then, all at once, everything happened. The she-wolf lunged first, a blur of muscle and fury, crashing into the nearest attacker. Snow exploded around them as they rolled, snapping and snarling. The second wolf darted in, aiming for the pup, but I was faster. I swung the axe without thinking, the blade slicing through the air. The wolf yelped, jumping back, eyes flashing with hesitation. They weren't expecting a fight from me. Good. The third wolf hesitated just long enough for the she-wolf to break free. Blood stained her fur, but she was still standing, still fighting. Her eyes flickered to mine, and in that instant, I understood. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding it. I stepped forward, placing myself between the pup and the wolves, raising the axe again. My presence, my defiance, it confused them. They had expected easy prey. But now, with one of their own injured and a human in the mix, the odds had shifted. A tense silence filled the clearing. The wolves paced, snarling, trying to decide if the fight was worth it. Then slowly they backed away, not out of fear, not out of defeat, but because they had lost the advantage. The she-wolf stood tall, bloodied but unbroken, as the rival wolves melted back into the trees. Gone, but not for good. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. My arms ached, my chest burned, but it was over. The pup let out a small, uncertain whimper. I turned to it, crouching down, feeling the weight of what had just happened. It looked up at me, then at its mother. The choice was made. Slowly, shakily, the pup stepped forward. Not to me, but to her. She lowered her head, touching her nose to its fur, letting out a low, soothing rumble. She had her child back, and I had to let go. I met the she-wolf's gaze one last time. There were no words for what passed between us. No way to explain what we had shared in those brutal, freezing nights. But I knew this. She had trusted me with her most precious thing, and I had not failed her. Without a sound, she turned, leading her pup into the trees. The snow swallowed their tracks almost instantly, and just like that, they were gone. The wind howled through the empty clearing. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where they had disappeared, knowing I would never see them again. But some part of me knew they would remember, and so would I.